The rain poured down in heavy sheets, drumming against the pavement as the city lights flickered in the puddles below. A woman stood at the edge of the sidewalk, clutching a small duffel bag. The only thing she had left in the world. Her name was Olivia Carter, and just hours ago, she had walked out of prison, free for the first time in 5 years. But freedom felt different than she had imagined. It wasn't a rush of relief. It wasn't a fresh start. It was cold, uncertain, and terrifying. She had nowhere to go, no one waiting for her. Society had already decided who she was. A convict, a mistake, a woman not to be trusted. But fate had a strange way of working. Miles away, in the heart of an upscale neighborhood, Nathan Sterling sat in his grand, glass-walled office, staring at a file on his desk. It was her file. Olivia Carter, age 32, recently released, convicted of fraud. A decision she claimed had been made in desperation, not malice. Nathan had read her file twice now, but still, his gut told him to take a chance. A part of him didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was because he had spent years drowning in the emptiness of wealth, knowing that money couldn't fix everything. Maybe it was because his twin children, Mason and Lily, needed more than just a nanny. They needed someone who understood pain, who knew what it was like to lose everything. Nathan's assistant had practically begged him to reconsider. "Sir, hiring someone fresh out of prison to care for your kids, it's a risk." He had nodded, acknowledging the concern, but his mind was already made up. Everyone deserves a second chance. And so, the call was made. Olivia had been expecting rejection. Every job application she had filled out in the past week had been met with polite refusals, or no response at all. But then, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "My name is Nathan Sterling. I'd like to meet you." She almost didn't believe it. A job interview, a real chance. It felt impossible. Hours later, she found herself standing in front of a massive wrought iron gate, her heart pounding. The Sterling estate was nothing like the run-down apartment she had once called home. It was a world she had never belonged to. Polished marble floors, high ceilings, the scent of fresh-cut flowers filling the air. And yet, the moment she stepped inside, she felt something else, something unexpected. Loneliness. The house was beautiful, but it was empty in a way money couldn't fix. Nathan sat across from her in a sleek leather chair, his gaze sharp but not unkind. He asked her about her past, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to hide from it. She told him the truth. She had made mistakes. She had paid for them. And now, she just wanted a chance to prove she was more than the worst thing she had ever done. There was silence for a moment. Then, he simply nodded. "The job is yours." Just like that, Olivia didn't know whether to feel relieved or suspicious. No one gave second chances that easily. No one trusted ex-cons around their children. But before she could question it, she heard the sound of tiny footsteps. Turning, she saw them, Mason and Lily. The twins were small, with bright, curious eyes. But there was something in their expressions that mirrored her own past. A quiet sadness, a guardedness. Lily tilted her head, studying her like a puzzle she hadn't figured out yet. "Are you going to leave too?" The question hit Olivia like a punch to the chest. She didn't know what had happened before, why Lily would ask that, but something told her this job wasn't just about taking care of 2 kids. It was about repairing something broken, something deeper, and Olivia had no idea if she was ready for it. But ready or not, her life was about to change. The first few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Olivia moved through the massive house like a ghost, careful not to touch anything she didn't have to, careful not to overstep. The twins weren't unkind, but they weren't open either. Mason, the quieter of the two, barely spoke to her. Lily was more curious, but there was a distance in her eyes, like she was waiting for Olivia to prove she wasn't worth trusting. Nathan was hardly home. He was always on calls, in meetings, dealing with things Olivia didn't understand. It didn't take long for her to realize that despite all the wealth, this house wasn't a home. It was a beautiful, empty space, filled with people who barely knew how to connect with one another. One evening, Olivia found Lily sitting on the stairs, hugging a small stuffed rabbit. It was well worn, clearly loved, but something about the way Lily held it felt different, like she was holding onto it for dear life. "You can sit," Lily mumbled, not looking up. Olivia hesitated, but took a seat beside her, careful to keep a little distance. "Can't sleep." Lily shook her head. "Mason has nightmares sometimes. I wait until he's okay." Olivia frowned. She had heard muffled cries from the twins' room a few nights before, but hadn't known what to do. She wasn't sure if she was allowed to step in, or if that would make things worse. "What are they about?" Lily shrugged, picking at the rabbit's ear. "Mom!" The single word made Olivia's stomach drop. She had seen no sign of a mother in the house. No pictures, no mention of her, nothing. It was as if she had been erased. Olivia didn't press, but she could feel the weight of Lily's sadness, the unspoken pain she and her brother carried. A few days later, Olivia finally met Nathan again, not in his office, but in the kitchen late at night. He was standing by the counter, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked different than he did during the day, less like the polished billionaire, and more like a man who was tired, who carried too much. "You're up late," he said, his voice rough. "So, are you?" Olivia countered. Nathan let out a low chuckle, rubbing his jaw. "Guess we both have trouble sleeping." She debated whether or not to ask, but something about the way he stood there, alone in the dim kitchen, made her speak. The twins missed their mom. Nathan's expression barely changed, but there was a flicker of something. Pain, regret, maybe even guilt. "I know." What happened to her? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then, in a voice quieter than before, he said, "She left." That was all. 2 words. But Olivia knew there was more to the story. The way Mason had nightmares. The way Lily clung to her stuffed rabbit. The way Nathan drank alone in the dark. None of it suggested a simple goodbye. Days passed, and Olivia tried to get closer to the kids. But it was slow. Mason barely spoke, but she noticed he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. Lily was easier to talk to, but trust was still a fragile thing. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Olivia had taken the twins to the park near the estate. It was a quiet place, mostly empty, and for the first time, they seemed almost at ease. Mason sat on a bench, reading a book, while Lily ran ahead, chasing butterflies. That's when Olivia noticed a man watching them from across the park. At first, she thought nothing of it, but then she caught the way his eyes followed the twins, the way he seemed too focused. Her instincts kicked in. She had spent enough time around dangerous people to recognize one when she saw them. Without making it obvious, she moved closer to Mason, shielding him as she called out to Lily, "Come here for a second." Lily frowned but obeyed. Olivia crouched down, keeping her voice light but firm. "We're going home now." "But why?" She smiled, but her eyes flickered back to the man. He was still there, still watching. "Because I said so." Lily pouted but didn't argue. Olivia took both of their hands and started walking back toward the car, her heart pounding. She could feel the man's gaze on them, and for a split second, she thought about turning around, confronting him. But then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, He turned and walked away. When they got home, Olivia debated telling Nathan. She had no proof. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was just paranoid. But that night, she found Mason awake, staring out the window. "Hey," she whispered. "Why aren't you sleeping?" He hesitated, then spoke so softly she almost missed it. "I saw him too." Olivia's breath caught. "You know who he is?" Mason nodded slowly. "He used to come to our house, before Mom left." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Olivia sat in the dark, staring at Mason's small, serious face. The weight of his words pressed down on her like a heavy stone. "He used to come to your house," she repeated, keeping her voice calm, even though her heart was racing. Mason nodded. He hesitated, then whispered, "I think he's looking for Mom." Olivia didn't know much about the twins' mother. Nathan never spoke about her, and the kids barely mentioned her, except in small, painful fragments. But she knew one thing. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just some stranger. The next morning, she decided to tell Nathan. She found him in his office, deep in work. But the moment she mentioned the man at the park, his whole demeanor shifted. His hands clenched on the desk, his jaw tightened. He didn't say much at first, just listened. But the look in his eyes told Olivia that this wasn't new to him. "I need you to tell me exactly what he looked like," Nathan said, his voice sharper than she had ever heard. Olivia described the man. Tall, mid-40s, dark hair, a scar near his temple. Nathan's expression darkened. His voice was quiet but firm. "Stay inside the house with the kids. Don't take them out again until I figure this out." That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in the park, the way the man had watched them. Something about it didn't sit right. If he had been part of the twins' past, why was he watching them now? Hours passed, and, finally, exhaustion took over. But just as she drifted off, a sound jolted her awake, a thud. She sat up, heart pounding. Another thud, this time from downstairs. Without thinking, she grabbed the small lamp from her nightstand and crept toward the door. The house was silent, but something felt off. She made her way down the hallway, pausing outside the twins' room. The door was closed. Then she heard it. Voices, low and hushed, coming from the front of the house. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the thought of Mason and Lily, alone in their room, made her push forward. She peered around the corner and saw him, the man from the park. He was standing near the entrance, speaking in a low, hurried voice to someone just out of sight. Fear gripped her, but she forced herself to focus. He wasn't breaking in. He had been let in, and then she saw who he was talking to. A woman, Olivia. Didn't recognize her at first, but when she stepped into the light, she felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. She didn't need to ask. She knew it was the twins' mother. Her hair was lighter than in the few photos Olivia had seen, tucked away in Nathan's office, and there were deep shadows under her eyes. But there was no mistaking it. She was back. The man whispered something, and the woman shook her head, her expression tight with fear. Olivia couldn't hear everything, but she caught pieces. "Not safe. They're my kids. He'll never let me see them." The woman looked toward the staircase, her face twisting with pain. That was when Olivia realized. She hadn't come to take them. She had come to see them. One last time, a floorboard creaked under Olivia's foot. The woman's eyes snapped up, locking onto hers. For a split second, everything was still. Then, in a rush, the woman turned and ran. The man followed, disappearing into the night. Olivia stood frozen, her heart hammering. By the time Nathan stormed downstairs, they were already gone. He saw the open door, the panic in Olivia's eyes, and knew immediately she was here. Nathan's face hardened, but there was something else in his expression too, something Olivia had never seen before. Pain. She didn't try to take them, Olivia said quietly. She just wanted to see them. Nathan's hands curled into fists. She lost that right when she walked away. The anger in his voice was sharp, but Olivia saw through it. This wasn't just rage, it was heartbreak. She took a deep breath. Nathan. Maybe the kids deserve to know the truth. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, the fight had drained from his face. The next morning, Mason and Lily sat on the couch as Nathan knelt in front of them. His voice was softer than Olivia had ever heard it. I need to tell you something about your mom. Mason looked away, his hands gripping the edge of his sweater. Lily just watched him, waiting. Nathan hesitated, then spoke the truth. Their mother hadn't simply abandoned them. She had been scared. She had made mistakes, had been pressured by the wrong people, but she had loved them. She still did. Lily sniffled, pressing the rabbit tighter to her chest. Mason didn't say anything, but his shoulders relaxed just a little. Olivia stayed in the background, watching. She had never had a family like this, never had a father who sat down and told her the truth. No matter how hard it was, she thought back to the woman from the night before, the way she had looked at her children from a distance, knowing she might never hold them again. And Olivia realized something. Not everyone gets a second chance, but some do, and sometimes that's enough.